Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the biggest problems currently in Total War Warhammer Free Immortal Empires. And I'm not talking about the bug that currently exists with patch 2.1, which is affecting minor settlement battles while on the defensive, where your game will freeze up in a very weird way. I've had that happen several times already. It is genuinely annoying, but it will hopefully be fixed very quickly. No, I'm talking about bigger issues in this video. Issues with factions, issues with the economy, issues with the AI, issues with difficulty. Is the game too easy? I don't necessarily think it is too easy, though I think there is certainly a problem when it comes to the difficulty curve. The game starts out way too hard and then becomes way too easy later on. I think that in particular needs some adjustment, though if you're playing certain factions you're going to find the entire experience a breeze, like Warriors of Chaos as an example, or Greenskins with say perhaps Grimgor, Warzag, and Grom, and some other factions as well. Of course, you're going to have some easy campaigns, you're going to have some hard campaigns, but every campaign, if you get to the middle late game, becomes very easy. That's already a big enough problem. So first off, let's talk about the Empire, because the Empire does present a number of issues with the game currently. A decent number of issues. First off, there is the Imperial Authority system, which currently right now doesn't work all that well in a lot of ways. Now, with the 2.1 patch, they've made it so that you will lose less Imperial Authority when Festus, who I've wiped out in this particular campaign, when Festus takes out Hockland. And Festus is almost certain to take out Hockland within the first 2 free turns. That of course presented a problem because you would have lost free Imperial Authority, which would have put you right here in declining. So if you only lose 1, I believe it's 1, that is a substantially better situation, and you can always just rush and deal with Festus. But although that's a band-aid fix, I do not believe it's enough, because I think starting with 0 Imperial Authority and having to rush to deal with Festus is not necessarily the most fun campaign start. Some people just want to focus on the challenge, but here's the thing: if you're an experienced player, dealing with Festus, dealing with the initial situation as Karl Franz is not necessarily about challenge, it's about frustration. I don't like playing as Karl Franz. I don't like playing as him in Warhammer 2. I don't like playing as him in Warhammer 3, because every time I start a campaign, the first 6-10 turns, I'm always going to do the exact same things in the exact same order, and they're not going to be either challenging or fun. This is on legendary very hard battle difficulty, and I can tell you this: if you start a campaign as Karl Franz, the first 6 turns of the campaign, 5-6 turns, are going to be spent dealing with the Imperial Secessionist. But because you start in the exact same position, the AI, yourself, you're always starting the exact same position, the parameters at the start are always going to be the exact same, then it's never going to be different. You're always going to rush for, you're going to always take out the army here that's near Grunberg, take it out, having to fight them manually because you don't want to lose too many men fighting it and not resolve too many casualties. That's a different discussion. Not resolve inflicting enormous casualties on you. Just to give you an idea, for me, in the vast majority of battles, when I fight them manually, I'm losing perhaps even less men than if I set the difficulty, the battle difficulty, and not resolve to easy. So if I'm not resolving on very hard, I'm taking significantly more casualties than I would normally. So what does that lead to? Well, it leads to a very specific plan that works, where you take out the Imperial Secessionist within 5-6 turns, but you have to do it all the time. It's not fun, it's not engaging, it's not challenging even. People talk about challenge. It isn't challenging to wipe out the Imperial Secessionist. It isn't challenging to deal with Khazrak within the first 10 turns and then rush to deal with Festus, or ignoring Khazrak and just dealing with Festus. It isn't challenging, it is frustrating. And that is an issue that doesn't just apply to Empire, applies to other campaigns as well. So, an example of this is Katrin. Katrin has an incredibly hard campaign start. You can manage it, you can deal with it, but the way you deal with it It's just like Karl Franz spends the first 5-6 turns dealing with the rebels. She spends the first 4 turns dealing with the Norskins over here, then rushing like a maniac to deal with Frot, taking out Helpet, and that's the first 10 turns. You can do this consistently, constantly. It will work unless you get ambushed by Frot. That can happen, though. There is an element of randomness there. But by and large, you can do it. That doesn't make it a good experience. And that's the thing. Difficulty in isolation does not matter. How things are challenging is just as important as the challenging of itself. And that is the issue I do have here with a lot of campaign starts. One campaign start that is much better is with Belegar, because although dwarves are broken in their own way with the grudge system, and I'll get to that in just a moment, Belegar has to deal with Karakate Peaks to reduce the upkeep problem, but he can regularly deal with that within, let's say, 15 or so turns, 20 turns at most, take Karakate Peaks, resolve the upkeep problem, and then play his campaign. But that is a much better situation, because within 15 turns things change, things develop in ways that you don't necessarily expect. If I start the campaign, I'm always dealing with the same frustrating crap again and again and again, then that campaign is far less interesting. This is why, from my perspective, playing as Balthazar Gelt, although he has the problems with the Imperial Authority, or did have the same problems with the Imperial Authority, though that has been reduced, but the problems are still there. He has a much better start because he just swarms the greenskins here, and then he has choice flexibility. His campaign can go in many different ways from turn 1 or turn 2. Many different ways. He's not spending an hour, 2 hours of his life. If you're playing Gelt, you're not spending an hour or 2 hours of your life dealing with the same frustrating crap again and again and again. I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, but it is a point I want to make. Now, another issue with the Empire in particular is the dilemma system. So with the dilemmas, sometimes what happens is you get a random battle. An AI army will spawn, they'll attack a settlement. You can either send scouts and do nothing about it, you'll lose fealty and all that. They might even take out the settlement of your elector count, which is something you want to avoid. Or you can either spend prestige or money to deal with that. Now, that's not a great system to begin with, because you basically are going to have like 2,000 coins in the bank to deal with it. And now it's kind of a bit worse, because the reinforcement system for those battles means that your reinforcements, your army, which is a reinforcement army, is not going to spawn instantly. So you're going to have some issues with to deal with that. Though, by and large, for the most part, for these battles, auto-resolve does tend to work, but it's not really a great system at the moment. It just doesn't work all that well. So the Empire still needs some work. The Empire does have a good economy. They do have good growth. They do have a good army, but they just have these older systems that just don't work as well right now in the current game. Because the current game is really based heavily on the idea of expanding as quickly as possible to get a powerful empire as quickly as possible. And I think the Imperial game plan suffers from that. The Empire also suffers from the fact that your elector count, you can't get a defensive alliance, military alliance, so you can't replenish in their territory. You also don't have the ability to give them orders or tell them, hey, go attack this territory or that territory. You can only do so with your actual allies. You can't get outposts, you can't attack, defend target. You just don't have that kind of flexibility when you are playing the Empire, and as a result of that, the Imperial campaign is incredibly limited. These are the kind of things I feel need to be improved on. The dilemma system, the Imperial Authority also needs to be improved, maybe starting with Imperial Authority. Band-aiding it so Festus isn't as big of an issue is not necessarily a big solution, because you can lose Ostland pretty quickly, you can lose Ostermark pretty quickly. And you can end up losing an enormous amount of Imperial Authority. Midland is generally going to be fine, and I understand the goal of an Imperial campaign is to be putting out the fires. The problem is the tools for you to do so are incredibly limited, because of the limitations in diplomacy, the limitations with the legion system. and the fact that you are dealing with a system that forces you to run around trying to put out the fires, preventing your elector counts from being annihilated. It used to be fine when they first introduced it, but now with all the myriad of threats the Empire is facing, I just don't think it works all that well. It needs some changes, some bigger changes than just losing less Imperial Authority if Hochland gets wiped out, from my perspective. And I think a lot of campaigns, a lot of harder campaigns, or harder starts, could certainly benefit an enormous amount from having less frustrating crap to deal with at the very start of their campaign. Then we move on to the Dwarves, and Dwarves highlight a certain number of problems. They highlight issues with how strong the Greenskins are and how weak the Dwarves are in quite a few respects. The Dwarves do have a phenomenal army. Quarrelers in particular are incredible units. I do have a campaign here as Belegar, turn 23. I have Caracate Peaks, but I have a Wa marching here from Urzag, and I do have 2 other armies marching here. This campaign, well, I could salvage it, but yeah, it would be painful in quite a lot of ways. Mistakes were made. But here's the problem with the Dwarves. If you're playing any Dwarven faction, but in particular Ungrim or Belegar or Forek, you are going to have a nightmarish time dealing with your campaign. Why is that? Because of the grudge system. Grudges start at a level, let's say 10, and then get to an incredibly high level very quickly. This is turn 23. The grudges that I started with to deal with Clan Moors and to deal with Skarsnik are at level 40 severity. So right now my meter is very close to being full, and so I have a research rate to minus 20%, control minus 3. I do get the charge bonus, which is nice, but I also lose diplomatic relations. What this really means is that if you're playing a dwarf legendary lord, with the exception of Forgrim, who can deal with his issues, though he has the same problem where his grudges will become very severe very quickly, or Grumbrindle, who starts with 3 grudges but can deal with 2 of them. But outside of those 2, if you're playing Belegar, Ungrim, or Forek, you are just going to have to deal with the fact that you will be playing a large portion of your campaign at a severe disadvantage. Now, the grudge system shouldn't work like this. It should be something that forces you to deal with it, something that pressures you to deal with the problem, something you can't ignore, but it shouldn't be an enormous campaign disadvantage that you get within the first 20 turns. It is especially bad for Forek, Ungrim, and Belegar, because dealing with Clan Moors, well, Clan Moors is here. I've wiped down many of their armies. I haven't been able to complete the grudge, but I'm pretty close to it. But it's a lot of territory to cover to have to deal with Clan Moors or to deal with Skarsnik, who is over here. Another issue with the grudge system beyond the severity, and it's especially bad as Forek, like if you're playing as Forek, you're just going to have to accept you're going to have that permanently. Maybe as Belegar and Ungrim you can deal with it, though it is a very harsh road and you have to do a lot of traipsing around, which can leave you vulnerable to enemies attack you, creating more grudges, spins out of control. I do feel that if you're playing any of these factions, you just have to accept the fact that you're going to have this significant disadvantage. Maybe Ungrim can resolve them, but he also has a harsh road in terms of doing so. But another problem that gets created, with this, of course, is those grudges. That -3 control is going to affect your control overall, which in turn will affect your growth overall. And dwarves already have an enormously big problem with growth. They just don't have good growth at all. And the name of the game currently in Immortal Empires is quick expansion. If you can capture a large amount of territory, that's what can make you powerful. If you're struggling in expanding your settlements, if you're struggling in expanding your territory, if you're constantly dealing with the threat of rebellions, and that's a limiting factor to the point that you may have to maintain armies to prevent those rebellions from taking place, or even if those rebellions don't start, your expansion is, your settlement upgrades are significantly slowed down because of the poor growth due to poor control, then you're just going to be much slower than other factions. And this is an issue all the dwarves have, even Forgrim and Grombrindal, though they can deal with their grudges much better. Because Forgrim just has a grudge. The worst thing that Forgrim has is a grudge to deal with Clan Moors. But outside of that, he has a grudge with Skarsnik, and he has a grudge with Black Crag. And a grudge basically to take down Gorfang Rutgut. That isn't the worst situation, and you can tackle those issues, but you will likely get the grudge meter full. But you can at least reduce it, and it isn't necessarily going completely out of your way. Like as Belegar having to take Caracate Peaks, which in itself is a grudge, then dealing with Clan Moors, then hoping perhaps that Forgrim takes out Skarsnik or dealing with him yourself, is a lot to ask. It would be a lot to ask even if the severity would ramp up far slower, but it ramps up incredibly quickly, and that is what needs to be changed. The ramp up of grudges needs to be far slower. The way it works right now is ridiculous, and some of the grudges themselves are ridiculous. Like if you start a campaign as Ungrim, here's what you need to do. You need to take out the Silver Pinnacle, you need to fight 3 battles against the vampire counts, you need to deal with Azag, and you need to occupy Karak Vlag. All of those objectives combined would be a challenge, but it wouldn't be insurmountable. What makes it, I guess, feel insurmountable is the fact that they ramp up so quickly. There's just no conceivable way for you as a player, when playing many of the dwarves, to resolve these grudges by the time your meter is full. And it's gonna stay full for quite a few turns after that. You just don't have an easy way to deal with. Grombrindal has the problem, of course, it has the same issue, though he can deal with at least 2 of his grudges, in the sense that 2 of his grudges basically are kill the Dark Elves, kill Malekith, more or less. Another issue, though, with the grudges is, say for instance, I have a grudge here to take out the Crooked Moon. Okay, but what happens if the Crooked Moon dies before I win those 5 battles? Do I get the reward? If someone else kills them, do I get the reward? No. If I kill them, let's say I'm playing as Forgrim, he has this grudge, he has the same reward. If I kill them, do I get that reward? No. Unless I actually fight and win those 5 battles, I do not get that reward. Which leads to a really bullshit situation where an incredibly good item for Forgrim or for Belegar may not be gained if either someone else wipes them out. Like with Skarsnik, you will fight them early on, but you may not want to kill him. Okay, let's try and get the rune. Well, then Ungrim comes in and finishes the job for you, and, well, good luck. You just lost the rune. Now, losing the Master Rune of Spite can hurt, but this is an issue that goes way, way, way beyond the grudges, because it's an issue with objectives in general. For instance, I played the campaign. I'm gonna move the map to Ulfwan here. I played the campaign as Tyrion. Well, Tyrion, for one of his items, Tyrion has a quest to get the Phoenix Gate. Okay. For one of his really, really good items, the Heart of Avalon. But what if Alariel takes the Phoenix Gate? Well, then the objective disappears. And you can't get one of your items in your set. An incredible item, one that really contributes to Tyrion's own power. So there is an oversight when it comes to these kind of things. Or if you're playing as another example, if you're playing as Alberic, you have an objective to capture Sartosa. Now that is an incredible distance to cover between where you start to Sartosa, but beyond that, what if someone else takes Sartosa? Now Sartosa likely won't be taken out by someone else, but what if someone were to take Sartosa? Would you lose that item as well? So there's a lot of oversight when it comes to these decisions, and some of those items, some of these rewards just don't work all that well from my perspective. And the rewards, honestly, like outside of like things like Master Rune of Spite, like the Oath Gold is not really that important. You get a bit of gold, not relevant at all. For sorting some of these grudges, you should get better rewards. They should ramp up with far less severity. They should be less punishing and more rewarding. Yes, the Master Rune of Spite is an incredibly rewarding thing, but with the exception of something like that, many of the grudges aren't that great. Unless you're playing with Forik, for whom the grudges are incredibly powerful campaign buffs. But outside of that kind of context and something like a Master Rune of Spite, it just feels like a lot of the rewards just aren't worth that major effort you're putting in. You're putting in the effort to get rid of this meter. You're not putting in the effort because, oh, the reward is going to be so great and it's going to change my entire campaign. Another concern as well there. Then to talk about the Ogres and some of the issues they do highlight about the game. The Ogres have one big issue, the camps. There is an incredibly limited number of them, and you are heavily reliant on your camp system for an economy, for your income, because of the building over here. This will generate a significant mountain of your income unless you get something like a gold mine, or you're having the Great Hall of Greases, which has the toll booth. But outside of those kind of specific settlements, by and large, when it comes to your economy, you are reliant on camps. Here's the issue with camps. They don't have a regular garrison like normal settlements do. And on top of that, when it comes to the camps themselves, even if you are to give them units, like if I move him here, you can't move a lord into a camp. The camps are like a minor settlement, a particularly weak minor settlement. But the problem is you can't say move your legendary lord to defend the camp. Like, let's say, oh, well, massive enemy army is heading towards my camp. Okay, let me just move my army there. You cannot do so, which means that the camps themselves are very vulnerable. Now, the Ogres in general are fairly strong on the battlefield. This is not necessarily a problem you're going to encounter as often as you might think, but it can absolutely happen, and it can be devastating to lose a camp because you can lose a lot of effort, a lot of income, a lot of military production. They're just too vulnerable, too weak, too easy to take down. The minor settlements of the Ogres are not great, and you are going to have significant problems expanding as the Ogres because you do need the meat. Without meat, your units are just going to wither and die. The issue is, there's only a limited number of camps that you can deploy. So although the Ogres are incredibly powerful on a campaign level, they just won't be able to paint the map in their colors because they can't deploy enough camps around the map to support their economy, to support meat for their armies. As a result of that, Ogre armies will be very limited in number, and you will be limited in how far you can expand. Like, as Greases, you can get... I have 4 camps right now available. I've got already 3 deployed. Sure, you can pack up camps and make new ones to deal with the meat issue, but your economy is going to suffer in an extreme fashion. But as Greases, you do get a skill for another camp limit. You start with 0 camps. You have your main research tree will give you 1, 2, 3, 4 camps, and then you can get one more over here. So that's 5, 6 so far with Greases. So you get 4 for the main tree, an extra 1 through some research, so that's 5 from the skill tree so far, 6 with Greases' skill, and then 7 and 8 with these skill trees. So that would take an enormous amount of turns to be able to do so, to get that number of camps available in your campaign. And even then, that is limited. So Ogres just have a major problem in terms of expanding their empire because they just don't have the tools to be able to do so. Unless you decide to base your entire economy on the idea of sacking settlements. Greases has an enormous advantage when it comes to that, because he does get 50% extra loot from sacking and looting settlements. So you can have a great advantage early on if you destroy a couple of cafe caravans, get a lot of money, like 20,000, 30,000 or so gold. I've certainly done that. That really helped me out early on expanding, because otherwise your economy is fairly weak. But making a game plan just purely based on the idea of looting and sacking settlements is just not a great thing for a campaign plan in general, when you have weak settlements and your main settlements are incredibly vulnerable to enemy attack, and you can't adequately protect them either. You can't make camps walled. You can't make mega garrisons in your camps. Or you can make mega garrisons, but because they're not led by a competent lord, they're going to be incredibly vulnerable to any legendary lord that attacks them. Like, compare the ogre situation to the greenskin situation, because I think this This comparison really shows you what is much better. Greenskins also have an economy that in a lot of ways is based on looting and sacking. They gain an enormous amount of gold from sacking settlements. They have a skill tree that benefits them. But beyond that, they have incredibly strong economic benefits from minor settlements because they can get the shiny pile, which can give you up to 500 gold for level 3. They have much better growth than most other factions. They have good public order, a good public order situation. They can maintain a large number of very cheap armies, and then they have the WA. I'd say the Greenskins are one of the best factions in the game currently because not only do they have powerful armies, but they have a powerful economy that can support massive expansion, and each army can double in size when you have a WA going for it. And you can gain mountains and mountains and mountains of gold from looting and sacking settlements. I think this issue reflects on the economic problems that a lot of factions have and the limitations those economic problems do impose on a lot of campaigns. But there's more to it here. As Greece is here, I did declare war on several Cathayan factions to loot their caravans. I didn't think much of it. At the start, they were minor factions who have their own issues, like the Celestial Reverlands, for instance, or the Nomads, the Rebels. And what ended up happening, to my surprise, is that although these guys are under enormous threat, like for instance here, the Rebels, the Dissenter Lords, are about to get wiped out by the Western provinces. The Celestial Riverlands is doing better, but they're also under a great deal of pressure. And the Nomads are getting wiped out by the Wood Elves. And all of these things, by the way, the threat of the Wood Elves, the threat of the Vampires, the threat of the Western provinces taking out the Dissenter Lords did already exist, but here's what AI will do a lot of the time. They will not care. Even if they lose all of their settlements, even if they get completely wiped out, they will undertake actions against either yourself as a player or against other AI factions that is just basically them suiciding their armies. Because I had 3 stacks here, that was scary. But the fact that these AI factions sent 3 stacks, each one a stack against me, meant that they suicided basically a significant portion of their combat power instead of worrying about their home provinces. And as a result of that, they've gotten wiped out. And you see this again and again and again with AI. The AI, what the AI will do is like, oh, you have a vulnerable settlement, like a minor settlement, better go and raise it or sack it or take it over. Never mind that my home province has an entire invasion force coming for it. No, it's more important to take that minor settlement of the player or a fellow AI faction. Avoid major fights at any cost and just go for what I would call Fabian tactics in Total War. Because that's what AI is doing, is trying to screw you over, or trying to screw its opponents over on an economic level by taking those minor settlements. But the game plan just doesn't work. I think this is actually what contributes a great deal to the AI weakness in the mid to late game. It's not that the AI is incredibly weak early on. I mean, if you play certain campaigns, you'll realize just how powerful the AI can be. But because it does have this kind of decision making associated with it, and it rarely goes for major settlements, which should be its goal, it rarely will wipe an entire faction out, or it will do so very slowly, incredibly slow. Like, why are the Dissenter Lords here alive? Like, this is a great example. Why has it taken it to turn 41 for an early game enemy they can wipe out by, like, let's say turn 15 with ease as a player? Why has it taken Xiao Ming so long to do so? Because the AI decision making is currently really, really bad in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. It's not about the benefits, I feel. In fact, I can talk about that. I think like the AI is perfectly fine early game, but it just ends up screwing itself again and again in the mid-late game. Though there's something to be said about the way difficulty is handled in this game, in that the AI is perhaps too strong early on, but too weak late on. How do you fix that? Well, maybe gradual bonuses would be a solution, but I'm just going on a tangent. Gradual bonuses, like start the AI factions weaker so that it's not as frustrating and annoying to deal with them early on, but ramp up the difficulty. And don't just rely on the end game crises to provide an end game challenge. The AI needs a better game plan, and the way their buffs work also needs to be changed, because right now, and this was also the case in Warhammer 2, but right now in particular, is far more difficult to play in the early game than it is to play in the mid-late game. The mid-late game for an enormous number of factions is a joke. It's a steamroll. And the reason is, despite the bonuses that the AI has, it just squanders them. And the way those bonuses work is not necessarily in the best possible fashion, from my personal perspective. Also something to be talked about, how the economy works for a lot of factions, because relying on looting and sacking as your game plan will leave you incredibly weak otherwise. Speaking about campaigns that do suffer because they rely on looting and sacking settlements or defeating armies and taking their gold, I give you the Demon Prince. The demonic factions of Total War Warhammer 3 in general are fairly weak by default. Their economy is just not that great. You only really have this line building here that only gives you 100 at the start. Compare that to the Warriors of Chaos over here, who have a building that provides them 400 by default. You may notice the difference for every Dark Fortress. Now you could say, oh, you can build it in every minor settlement, so you have to spend less gold to get it going, and it's not really that much money. And of course the Warriors of Chaos also get a lot of vassal income and do rely on looting and sacking, but can be quite fine without it. It is just a bad game plan in general. But what's the issue with the Demon Prince? Well, every demonic faction has an incredibly weak economy, issues with control, issues with growth, unless you're playing Kugaf. But it doesn't necessarily matter for many of them, because if you're playing Scarsbrand, you just spawn infinite numbers of armies. If you're playing Nakar, you get Slaneshi Corruption, and you spawn a Disciple army, a full stack army, potentially. And you can also get Force of Vassalization, or if you're playing Kairos, you get an incredibly powerful magic user, the best in the game or on par with Teclis. So you do have incredible potential with those factions, though they do have issues with their economy, with their settlements, with their units as well. Because, well, Khorne units are good, but pink horrors or blue horrors are not quite as good. And yeah, there's just quite a lot of problems with the demonic game plan in the way that they were designed. I think it was fine for the base game, but in an Immortal Empires, in the globe-trotting adventure, it is a major issue, because you do have such a vast amount of territory to deal with. And then you also have the endgame crises, which are very large stacks of units, very large and powerful armies to also deal with. And you just won't be able to expand as the Demon Prince or as some other demonic factions to be able to deal with those crises. And therein lies the problems, limitations on the economy, limitations on your overall game plan. Like, for instance, a single Dark Fortress may generate, by this point in the campaign, this is turn 34, a single Dark Fortress would be generating more income in a single settlement than maybe my entire economy right now, in point of fact. A single building, as opposed to having two entire provinces that I have here. This, the Demon Prince situation also highlights the really questionable AI behavior, because, for instance, I do start close to Malice, and the idea is that he's going to declare war on you, but if you ignore him for a couple of turns, go east instead of west, what happened here, and this is something I've seen happen multiple times, is he'll just abandon his starting province, move his army down here, do very little against the Varg, and then he'll declare war on you, but he'll avoid the fights until it's much too late, and you just pick him off rather easily. Like, I've wiped out his main army, he's just down to one army here, he's lost his main hero, he's lost his really good starting units, he's gonna be destroyed. Maybe not even by me, maybe the Varg will present a challenge, maybe some other Norscan faction will send an army against him, because he does have quite a few enemies over here that he might have to deal with. Or maybe not, maybe I'll have to finish him off. But it won't really be too much of an issue. But then what? What, do I go to war against Norska? Do I go west? I mean, there are some choices. It's not really a hard campaign. It could be a very hard campaign if you're forced to fight Malice Darkblade early on, because he is a much better combatant than you are. The Demon Prince has always had issues in his design. He's always had issues because He has all the weaknesses the demonic factions have, and not necessarily any of the strengths either. Like, the whole idea is you get demonic glory, and you unlock parts and units, etc., gifts from the Chaos Gods, but it takes a while, and you won't reach the potential that, say, Skarsbrand has from turn 1 until much, much later, or ever, really. You'll never reach the potential that someone like Skarsbrand or Kairos have from the very, very start of their campaign. So they do have their own problems. So an incredibly limited faction, incredibly limited campaign, and not really a fun one. There needs to be redesign for him, and I think there needs to be redesign for the demonic factions in general. Like, N'Kari has a lot of issues, Kugaf has a lot of issues. They certainly need some help. There certainly need to be some improvements for quite a few factions to just give them the tools to compete against other factions, because Norsca is just much better. Warriors of Chaos are just much better. Be'lakor is significantly better. Like, even with the demons, Be'lakor can get better demons than you can much earlier on, and he has all the economic advantages of the Warriors of Chaos at his fingertips. Be'lakor is just in a much, much better position than you are, and he's going to be able to do a lot more than you will be able to do if you're playing the Demon Prince. Play Be'lakor, or hell, play Archaon or Kolic or any of the champions of Chaos. You will be able to accomplish a great deal more with their campaigns than you would as the Demon Prince. And it is kind of funny because Yuri was the main character of the prologue. They focused some of the marketing campaign on him, but he's just an incredibly weak and pathetic faction right now because of, well, poor design all around. Really poor design. And it's not just for the Demon Prince. There's poor design in other factions. There's oversight with other factions. The grudges of the Dwarves, for instance, the camps of the Ogres, the devotion issue that Kislev has, unless you're playing Borsurson. A lot of problems around the board for a lot of factions that just needs that just need improvement all around. So yeah, AI changes, growth changes, economy changes, you name it. If you have any other things that you'd add to the lists of problems that the game currently has, I'd like to hear them. Leave a comment below. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. Join the Discord, link in the description. And if you do enjoy my content, consider donating via PayPal or Patreon. Could certainly use your support. Stay tuned for more, everyone.